and gentlemen, you are listening to Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. It's an engaging and enlightening talk show on life, relationships, and the business of life. Grab a cup of juice and just chill. Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Live life, live fully.
Welcome to Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Now, in this season's episodes, we will be focusing on family dynamics. We like to have discussion on the patterns of interaction, relationships among family members, parenting, and also communication. We also want to talk about decision making and the likes. Now, I have got brilliant minds who are adept in these topics, brilliant mind in the industry regarding family dynamics and parenting topics. Now, we'll be sharing the podcast mic with me as we pivot positive changes and transformation in the area of parenting and family dynamics in order for us to begin to have a saner and more secure society in general. Today, I have John Fela, who is a national disability advocate and special needs dad. Thank you for joining me, John.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you once again for coming to the show. I'd just like us to explore on the topic of you moved and a parent. Now, this is something my audience and I are looking forward to, and I'm sure that we're going to have a really transformative meeting going forward. So I'd like us to begin with the struggles of parents with special needs. Do you have any personal experience? And also, I would like you to emphasize on stigmatization and discrimination in this regard.
Absolutely, sure. So, whenever I do a interview presentation like this, of course, I always start out by saying, first and foremost, I am a parent. I'm a parent of a child with a disability. My son, Chris, is 17 years old. He has autism, and he is also non-speaking, which basically means he has no oral communication. And he currently resides at a residential facility, which is also like a therapeutic day school as well. And so what I will tell you is that I started this work because very early on in my son's diagnosis, what I realized was, first of all, it's hard enough to be a parent, right? Having children, typical children, healthy children, is already enough of an endeavor. But when you bring in disability, and in my son's case, developmental disability like autism, where in his case, for example, everything was delayed. And to be quite honest with you, even at this age now, at 17, we know his mom, who I'm actually divorced from, his mom and I know that he's not going to be independent. He's not going to have a normal life as we would consider it. So the struggles that I dealt with, first of all, when he was very young and we started to understand these things and wrap our heads around it was, okay, what do we do in the moment, right? Most parents and families in our situation, they're kind of their first move, their knee-jerk reaction is, okay, what do we have to do to just address this in the moment, right? What doctor do we have to see? What therapy do we need? What information do we need to gather, right? And it's quite overwhelming. And what was interesting for me to see, and this is where I really speak from a fatherhood, from a dad perspective, is that, when the child is very young, usually in most families, not all, but in most, it's the mom that kind of jumps in and kind of takes over and takes control, right? And manages everything and communicates with all the professionals and that type of thing. And that very was also the case with my son's mom, with my ex-wife. And she was very good at that. But then I had to figure out, how can I contribute, right? And what I learned is, well, if she's handling that and she wants to do that and she's good at that, a lot of dads, a lot of men in my role will say, well, I'm just going to work very hard and I'm just going to make a lot of money and I'm going to pay for all of these things. Well, before I was an advocate, I was a teacher and my ex-wife was a teacher. So we didn't make a lot of money. So I couldn't pay for these things. So the question is what did I do, right? And so I had to figure out, one, what was my role and how I could support. Because again, when you have a child with a disability as severe as this, what happens is it brings pressure and stress to the family on all levels, right? It brought pressure to our marriage. It brought pressure to our finances. It brought pressure to just how we did daily life. My son, for example, and this is still the case, but certainly when he was very young, he couldn't be left alone. Right. And so in some ways I said, well, okay, I'm not handling all of these appointments and things. I'm not making all the money, but I can certainly be there for my child, right? And that's easy to say, but when you have a child with a severe disability who has constant needs, and in our son's case, he didn't really have the medical needs per se. It was more the behavior, cognitive development, etc. Meaning you just couldn't leave him alone because he was either going to hurt himself or get himself in some danger or something. And so a lot of families in our case are always kind of on that very high alert, very stress level kind of daily living experience. So what I had to figure out for myself was what did I bring to the table as a dad, and also I realized very quickly that there was really a need and an importance to find and connect with people like us who understood us. Most families, even with typical kids, will never know the experience that a family like ours goes through. Like I mentioned, my son is living at a residential facility. He actually lives at a facility that is, about 800 miles away from us. I live in the Chicago area, and this facility is in Kansas, so it's literally very far from us. There's a reason for that because his local high school could not meet his needs, so we had to make a transition. Some families do that at younger ages, even, and maybe whether that transition happens with something closer to home or far away on the other side of the country, for example. But certainly, up through all of these years, we had to make some very serious decisions about where he was going to be placed, the kind of services he needed, et cetera. So, having people that you can relate to, having people that you can connect with and communicate with, that is a big message that I really share because a lot of times the world just doesn't get it. They might be well-meaning, they might have the right intention about maybe asking you some questions or sharing some things, but they really don't know. So very quickly, I learned my role was to, first of all, be there for my child, no matter what, but also I could bring things to the table in terms of relationships, community, resources, and that eventually led into my advocacy work on a very big scale. But that really came out of being living in a place where we realized we didn't have a lot of control, we didn't have a lot of answers, and quite honestly, we we needed help, and we didn't even know, quite honestly, where to begin.
John, now let's just take a sudden walk to how it all started. I knew you had a lot of questions popping on your head at that period of time. Now let's talk about some things you wished someone told you about parenting a child with disability.
Yeah, so the thing that you have to understand as I kind of painted the picture is having a child with a disability means your life is probably not going to be what you expected, for sure. Now, depending on the nature of the disability and depending on the severity of the disability, it could just mean that maybe a child needs to have some more support at school, or maybe needs to do a particular therapy, or, maybe needs a little extra assistance to be independent, and eventually they may be just fine. Some kids actually are able to work through some things with the right amount of support and therapy. Even adults who still identify with having a disability can still live very active, very independent lives with just certain supports in their life to kind of make sure that they're safe and they have everything they need. But what we had to consider when our child was very young, especially having a child with a severe of a disability and the severity of the autism he had, it was first of all, okay, well, where does he go to school? When he was born in the community we lived in, there were public schools, there were special ed classrooms and things and supports and teachers, but we didn't think it was a good fit for him. We actually made the decision to move to another town in our area. And of course, that took a lot, in terms of planning and financially and just doing the research to say, okay, if we do this move, what is the best town for us where we think our child is going to get served? And we actually think we picked a really good one. And he had a great experience for the most part growing up through that district. But for some families, it's a matter of leaving everything, right? Sometimes the move, like in our cases, may be an hour away. Sometimes for some families, it's another state or another part of the country altogether, and even sometimes even another country, quite honestly. So, for us in the early days, it was a question of, okay, how do we get the right services for them? And then on top of that, whatever is provided publicly, let's say by the school system, there are things on top of that you need. Most families do private therapies. Someone has to pay for that. Sometimes insurance pays for it, sometimes you pay for it. Do you have the money to pay for it? And that's why I mentioned that point about being a dad, and feeling that responsibility to pay for everything, because for a lot of our families, they have to figure out how to cover some of these things. And if they can't, then that means that the child just kind of goes without it. It doesn't mean some of those things still won't be provided, but they may not be provided in the way that they need to be. And then you look at long-term stuff, right? For most families, the question is, okay, my son is going to go, son, daughter is going to go to high school. They'll go to college or, whatever, school, post high school experience. They'll get a degree or a certification, whatever. They'll get a job. They'll move out. They'll take care of themselves. That'll never be my son. And for a lot of families in our position, it's not about getting the child through high school or college. It's literally planning the rest of their life. So in my son's case, for example, we've had to plan, what does school look like, because college will not be an option for him, because it just, because of his disability, there's no way that something like that could work for him. So he will, go through what's known as the high school transition program until he's 22. And then after that, what is his life, right? He will never hold a regular job. He will never be able to support himself. So, we have to think about, okay, is there maybe a job he could do in a small amount in terms of hours, or, responsibility, something maybe where he can get some support in doing, maybe volunteering, and then also doing things like day programs, right? Taking classes, social events, community outings, that type of thing. But at the end of the day, he's going to need care the rest of his life, and it's up to his mother and I to really create that world for him, right? So the planning doesn't end at 22, and it's not about, well, I'll set a little something aside for my kids when I pass or whatever. You have to consider the rest of their life while you are here, and you also have to consider it when you are gone. Right? You are literally planning for their entire life from start to finish. And that is a lot of stress. And quite honestly, even families that kind of have, a very good management of all these things. There are families I talk to who still don't have that plan in place. And that's not a judgment or a fault. It's just that it's so much. It is so much to plan and consider. So for a family of typical children to look at a family like ours, well, it's going to look different, mainly because at some point their kids will be able to take care of themselves, whereas my son never will.
All right, now that's very deep. In terms of managing the physical, emotional, and social demands of caregiving of children with special needs, you are in this situation and you quite agree, or you know what I'm talking about here. But I'd like us to emphasize the need for parents to begin to have the right support in this kind of situation. Do you have any ideas you can put forward?
Right, and that's where I absolutely lean into, when we started the conversation talking about not having community, right? Because one of the biggest stresses on a family like ours is, you may get a certain amount of support, ideally from your school district or from any state resources, public resources that are available. Certainly there are, your clinics, if your child has to go to a clinic, let's say for some specialized therapy and that type of thing. But the fact is that you really need to lean into creating a group of people and parents and families around you that understand you. Now, that serves a couple of different purposes. First of all, as I learned the hard way in the beginning, was that if you have no one that you can relate to, then it creates a situation where you feel like you're on an island, where you are isolated. And a lot of what then happens in the family, especially the marriage, and there's a reason why, as high as the divorce rate is in America, it's exponentially more high for families of disability. I'm not going to quote an exact number, but it is generally higher. The reason why is because in between the family dynamic and the marriage dynamic, there is so much guilt and shame that goes back and forth. And, it saying that, let's say one parent isn't doing enough or expecting another parent to do something else or more. And the family really doesn't have anyone to connect with. So what I emphasize to folks is, first of all, you need to get families or people around you that understand that. Now, what does that look like? Well, it can look a few different ways, but I always emphasize here too that it doesn't mean you have to join a bunch of groups if you don't want to, or go out and find a bunch of people on social media if you're not comfortable. You can certainly use those things, but I always emphasize start out simple. Start out with people in your own community, in your own neighborhood that might be having an experience like you, or where your children are similar. Reach out to those folks in your child's own school, in that community, and try to connect with parents. For myself and my son's mom, we started out years ago, even before I started doing most of the work that I do now, with just doing support groups for families of disability, moms groups, dads groups, etc. Sometimes people came to this kind of stuff, to these meetings. Sometimes they didn't, and certainly tried it. Had a few different times of trial and error. But the fact is that with groups like that, with those connections, you're not only developing resources as far as relationships with people who understand you, but they also provide you resources as well. Many times in our community, the best advice, the best resources, quite honestly, come from other parents and families. So the more that you can share information, the more that you can come together and be able to have this kind of dynamic back and forth relationship where, yeah, you want someone to just listen to if you're having a bad day, but also there might be something that you need to find for your child, or maybe something someone else has found that might be great to share. And then kind of branch out from there. And I say, look at the bigger community. Certainly connecting with people in your own neighborhood, connecting with people in your child's school, maybe connecting with people in your church if you belong to a church. And sometimes, I know for myself, where there were other families who had disability in them, connecting with those families in that environment, I know was also very helpful and supportive. And then, again, look at things like organizations, special needs organizations, disability organizations in your community that may provide parent support, may provide family support, may provide support groups or meetings, or those types of things, to not only share resources but to connect you. Social media is a great place for that. You go onto Facebook and you'll find a ton of disability organizations in your area. And the thing I want to stress is that it's not always about meeting someone in person, right? There are a ton of organizations, and I work with several of them, where they have virtual meetups where you can connect with somebody even if they're not in your part of the country, or you connect on Zoom or phone, or whatever it is. But the fact is that because families feel so isolated, especially early on when the child is very young, there is a need for you to find community. And so again, there are a variety of ways to do that, but I emphasize it, one, because it supports you as a person, it supports your family. However, it also provides and can provide valuable resources for things that you and your child might need now and also in the future.
All right, I really want to appreciate your thoughts on this important topic, John. I'd like us to talk about communication, the lifeline of any relationship. What do you think it is such an important part of supporting parents of disability?
Well, that can go in a variety of ways, but when I speak about communication, I actually, several years ago during COVID, when we experienced COVID. And what was interesting about that time for me was that was actually right at the same time when COVID was really happening. I was also going through a divorce from my son's mom, as I mentioned. And so I was learning how to be a single parent, and learning how to not just be a single parent, but also how to co-parent with my now ex-wife son's mom, because of course we still shared responsibility, but we were not married, we were not under the same roof. So communication is key. So what I came up with during that time was something called the three C's. And sometimes you see this in some other presentations I've done. It's communication, coordination, and compassion. Now, again, I came up with this because I found myself in a very unique place going through COVID, where everything started to become shut down and isolated, but then also figuring out how to do this now as a single parent, right? Where it was very isolating. So I created, kind of this model of these three C's, but I think that it can apply to those families where mom and dad are married, and I think it can also apply to people in your extended family group, friend group, and everybody that you work with. So, the first C, of course, is communication, right? So you want to make sure that, you are maintaining open lines of communication with everybody you need to. Now, in the case of what I experienced during COVID, that started with my son's mom. I can tell you the story, for example, that when COVID first started, I had just moved out, and so we were living in two different places. And I remember that I dropped my son off on a Sunday, And as I was driving away, I heard a report on the radio from the Illinois state governor saying that as of tomorrow, the next day, Monday, everything was going to be shut down. Restaurants, cafes, all of these public spaces, businesses, they're all going to be shut down. Why is that a problem? Because when you have a child with a disability, and that child is used to going to a certain place, a certain restaurant, getting a certain kind of food. Now all of a sudden everything is closed. Maybe you can't get it. So the first thing I did is I got on the phone and I called his mom and said, listen, I just heard this. I think this could be a problem. Let's see maybe how we can work together or if we need to give some suggestions to each other. And again, that was a great example of that. But again, that applies again to maintaining those good relationships with everybody in your child's life. And the other place where that communication does help is that it helps with building good relationships with the people that work with your child, right? Because with a lot of teachers and therapists, sometimes they feel like parents or families can, really kind of have it out for them, so to speak, meaning there's a lot of blame sometimes if maybe something isn't happening in the classroom or they feel maybe a teacher isn't working hard enough or whatever. Having good communication with the people who work with your child is so important because then you have a clear understanding of what's going on or a clearer understanding, a clearer picture. But then also, too, you're building a relationship so that when you do have to sit down and have those hard meetings, those IEP meetings or whatever you're going to discuss about your child, you have a clear back and forth that is comfortable where you have trust, you have built trust, and that people know that they can share with you, but then not feel like they're going to be attacked either, right? And having been an educator and also a parent, obviously I know that experience from both sides. And so I really encourage parents as to do as we did, especially when our son was younger, go to the school, go to the clinics, talk to everybody, visit, even speak to the staff or even the students. We've spoken even to our son's students about who our son is and maybe some different ways that they could engage with him and how he might present a little differently. So that's all where communication is key. And then coordination, again, coming out of, my situation with my son's mom is, okay, how are we managing things like our calendar, our schedule? One thing that I always, always, always communicate to families, get yourself a calendar. When I say that, I don't just mean, because I know we all have calendars on our phones, we all have our appointments in our phones. I don't just mean, okay, this is their appointment for the doctor or therapist. I mean, you need to have a calendar where you're also carving out time for yourself, for self-care. And that was a big thing that came out of COVID. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you doing things to maintain your health, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of it? So, when I was married to my son's mom, we actually had a very strict calendar where we had not just all of the places our son needed to be, but the days and nights when, let's say, mom got a break or dad got a break. That was your time. You wanted to exercise, you wanted to meet a friend, you wanted to go for coffee, whatever it was, that was your time. And then you also had time as a married couple to be together, have a date night, have some time as well, where you could also connect. So that coordination and saying, you know what? Yes, our son has to be the priority, and especially where there's divorce and two households, two parents, but you have to say, you know what, these are things that are important to me because if I'm not taking care of myself, I can't take care of my child. And again, as I kind of explained earlier, when you have a child with a severe disability, you have to be fully present, and that can be absolutely exhausting, again, on all of those levels. So you need that time for yourself. And then, obviously, if you are married, then you need that time together. You need that time to connect as a married couple so that you're having a healthy relationship, not just in terms of taking care of yourself, but also making sure that you're taking care of the other person and creating a strong family environment. So that's where that coordination comes in. And the last one is compassion, meaning, um, going through COVID and going through a divorce and going through all of these things emotionally, that was very hard for me. It's hard for anybody, in these situations, especially where disability is present. But again, think about, before you react to something, think about how you're showing up in your child's life. How are you showing up in the life of, your spouse, or if you're divorced with your child's mom, dad, whatever. Think about how you want to be seen, right? And remember that having a child with a disability, especially, is so hard and so difficult and so taxing on both parents. Have compassion. Have some grace. I remember thinking to myself, someday, as difficult as this all is, someday COVID will be over. We'll go back to normal life. We'll still be divorced. We will still be parenting our child. How do I want to remember the way that I acted during all of this, right? So you want to have that self-reflection and remember, be compassionate with the people who are in your child's life, who also care about your child, and remember that you're all working together for the good of that child.
So why do you think we should not forget special needs father? Why? What do you think they need so much attention?
So special need dads have a different experience than moms. It doesn't mean that we don't love our moms and our moms aren't important. It means that because we're men and women, we process differently and we respond to things differently. So men, for example, again, are fixers. We want to fix the problem. How do we fix it? Let's find the right doctor. Let's find the right therapist. Let's find the right professional. And I will work very hard, make money, or find whatever we need, sign them up, get them fixed. Great. For some kids, that is the case. For many, it is not. It is not about just seeing one doctor or one therapist or one treatment. For some kids, like my child, this is the rest of their life. This is just who they are. Doesn't mean you don't want to support them, but now what you find with a lot of dads, especially when the child is very young, is, you know, all parents have dreams for their child about how they're going to grow up, what they're going to be, what they're going to do. But also, as a parent, you have dreams about, like a dad. Oh, I can't wait to take my son and play sports with him. He's gonna play soccer. He's gonna play baseball. He's gonna do this sport. He's gonna go with me on these trips. He's gonna like the same things I like. Now, in my son's case, that's not really going to happen. He's not going to do any of those things. So, how can you, as a dad, still relate and have a relationship with your child, right? Because with men, especially when it is a male child, there can be a lot of guilt and there can be a lot of shame, excuse me, about, okay, how, if my child is presenting a certain way, how can I connect with them? How can I reach them? And so, what we want to do is to remember that your child is still your child. And you just want to think about ways that you can foster a relationship with them. So in my son's case, he doesn't really play sports, but he likes watching on TV. So that's something we can share together. And then in the limited ways, maybe we can do things, whether it's, we shoot, we have a basketball hoop in the driveway, or maybe we go to the gym at the church or YMCA or something. We shoot the basketball. He can't really do a lot of the same things because he doesn't have the motor abilities with his body. But you know what he likes when I do things? He likes passing the ball to each other. He just likes the experience of kind of being there. That's great. That's all it needs to be. This past weekend, I was visiting my son where he lives, and they went to a baseball league that they created just for adults and teenagers with disability. They call it Miracle League. So he got to play in the baseball game. He had someone help him with the bat. He had someone help him, hit the ball. He had someone help him run to the base. He had someone help him engage in all these things. That's awesome. For a lot of men, they would say, that's a defeat. That's a loss because I want my child to be able to do that by themselves. But in this case, we have to say, okay, yeah, he's never going to play baseball by himself. He's never going to, do anything big time, high school, college, whatever. But you know what? He's still participating, and I can still be a part of that. I can still have an experience with him that is something that I can relate to and that he's also having fun with. That's fine. But for men, again, what happens is that we have expectations and we have to shift those expectations. And many times because of the guilt and the shame, and especially when men have this shame about them where they don't like to share, they don't want to share. It's hard to share, especially with people they don't know. I mentioned finding people around you that understand you. Many times it's people that, are strangers, people that you haven't met or don't have a relationship with. You feel funny, you feel uncomfortable, you feel anxious about sharing. But and especially as a man, but that is also where I encourage it and I say, listen, for some men, They don't mind talking to a group of guys. Great. Some men have a hard time with that. I say that's okay. Find one. You start with one. Start with one person you can talk to. And if that's all you have, good. And then when you're comfortable, maybe find another, or maybe find a small group, whatever that looks like. But you have to find someone that understands you, because again, as men, we want to keep it inside. We want to maintain our pride, and we want to say, no, this can't be my child. And then when we realize where your child is and maybe what your child will or will not do, you want to go in denial, you want to ignore it, you want to say, well, I wish my child was different, but oh well, as opposed to, you know what? My child is still my child. They are still beautiful in the image of God. I love them. I embrace them. And however I need to adjust my thinking about how I can have a relationship with them, that's what I need to do.
All right. Thank you so much, John Fela, for sharing your thoughts on this important topic once again. Do you have any exciting new, perhaps, projects you think is going to add value to the audience of the podcast? All right. You also talk about your upcoming books. Feel free to share.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I have a couple of book projects I'm very excited about coming up. The first book is actually my memoir, so it's basically my journey as a special needs dad. It's called Faith Like My Father. Faith Like My Father. It's going to be released either later this year or very early next year. And again, it is my journey as a special needs dad, reflecting on things that my father taught me, which quite honestly was not much, but he gave me some very important advice that I didn't understand until later in life. And it's again my journey of raising my child and the lessons I learned going through divorce, single parenting, and then eventually finding love again and remarrying. So it's a wonderful journey, but it's very transparent, and it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. So I'm excited about that coming out. And then I have another book. It's technically not my book, but I have a friend who's doing a book with a woman named Temple Grandin, which a lot of people in the disability world will know who she is. She is a very, very big name in terms of advocacy, especially with autism and autistic adults. And so I contributed to that book. And that book is actually going to be geared for educators and therapists to give them a perspective of what it's like to either be a person with a disability or to be a parent of disability. So that's going to be a very valuable tool. I don't know if they finalized the title on that yet, so I can't give it to you, but I encourage you, follow me on social media, follow me on my website. You will be able to see those things, get those links and everything, all the promotional stuff once they come out.
All right. Go ahead and share your website.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just my name, johnfella.com. So johnfella.com. You can, of course, put my name into the Google, as I always say. You can find a lot of my content, not because I produce so much regularly. It doesn't always go up on the website right away, but you can Google me and still find videos, podcasts, etc. I'm also on the social media on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, John Special Needs Blog, John Special Needs Blog on Facebook, and I have a personal one as well. You can reach out to me at either. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on X, LinkedIn. Just type in my name, John Fela. You can also find me at all of those as well.
All right. Good to know. John, do you have any parting word you'd like to share to the audience? Go ahead if you have.
Yes, absolutely. As I've touched on it, for me, the most important thing is do not do this alone. It is so important to have people. It is so important to have community and have value. When people ask me my best advice as a former teacher, the way that my brain works, I say my best advice is number one little a and number one little b. Number one little a for me is my Christian faith. My Christian faith is the foundation of who I am. It has absolutely supported me through this journey. I would not be here without it. But I realize that some people who are maybe not Christian, not religious, they say, well, okay, but that's not me. I say, fine. But 1B is community. You must have people. You must have people who understand you. You must have people who will support you, who will build into you, and likewise, you also need to be there for them. And that is, the greatest value and gift that I've gotten is that as I have also developed and leaned into relationships with other people like me, they have also supported me when I needed it as well. So most of all, don't do this alone. Get yourself one person, and even especially if you're a dad listening to this and you say, I have nobody, reach out to me. I am always happy to communicate with you and see how we can help you and get you some resources.
I really appreciate your thoughts, John Fela, on today's show, especially as we talk about you and more than a parent. John Fela is the National Disability Advocate and Special Needs Dad. We had a worthwhile time exploring on this important topic for such a dynamic time as this, as we focus on parenting and family dynamics in the 21st century and how we can get it right. Not just in the family, in the society in general. Great to have you once again. And we sincerely wish you best of luck in your book projects and other subsequent projects you embark upon, John.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
This is Omobola Stephen. If you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the podcast, you can do so on any podcast distribution platforms or any podcast promotion platforms to bump into online, and do have a great time as you listen to professionals who are adept in the topics of personal development and self-improvement, especially in this season as we focus on family dynamics and parenting. And I guarantee you're going to have a 360-degree mind shift as we pivot our positive changes and transformation in the society in general. Till I come your way, I need you always to stay safe. I talk to you soon. Thank you once again, John. We had a great time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.